Jason's going to walk us through what's in a name, and he's got an activity that's not really going to be an activity. He has, like really good teachers do, has adjusted his plans to meet the needs of his eating compatriots, his colleagues in here. So let's give Jason a round of applause. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all. So as Kent said, my name is Jason Romero. I'm a teacher down in Southwest Denver. I teach at Strive Prep Smart. It's a high school off of like Federal, Mississippi. It's down in the Westwood neighborhood. This past year was my first year teaching. I taught 10th grade history of the Americas. Next year I'm going to be teaching seniors, civics, and AP US government. So that's kind of who I am. I was a student up at CU Boulder, graduated with a degree in ethnic studies, and that's kind of when I really began to be involved with this project and with this type of work. So the activity that we're going to be doing today, what's in a name? So we're going to go through, there's a Jeopardy game essentially that we're going to play, and within this, there's only 4 answers. So every single question is going to be one of these 4 responses. Hispanic, Latina, Latino, Chicana, Chicano, and then Chicano, Chicana with an X. So Hispanic, Latino, Chicana, Chicano with an X. Those are the 4 options for every single question. So
every single answer, we're given the questions, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. No, well, no. So it's not really Jeopardy, but yeah. Those are the responses.
Can you explain a little bit what Chicano and the X?
Yeah. So this symbol right here, has anybody heard of this before? No. Or seen it? So a couple of them, right? So in the back, what's your name, man? Can you explain for us what that symbol means? Or what have you heard about it? That what?
Usually means that.
Right, so yeah, like you usually see it in email addresses, but when we see it on terms like Latino, Chicana, Chicano, that symbol is called an arroba. And what it symbolizes is both gender identities, both male and female. But it also represents everything in between those, because it's not one or the other. It's all encompassing. So it encompasses a variety of different gender identities. And so I can't explain what the X means. That's going to be some of the questions that you'll be responding to for this. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll start right here at this table, and then we'll just move to the left and just kind of snake around. So this table, we have 4 categories: origins, use, social implications, and politically charged.
Oh, we get to pick.
Yeah, we get a pick. What do you think, guys?
Let's go big.
Let's go big or go home. I like that. Social implications?
Yes. For 1,000.
1,000.
Yeah, we're
Ooh.
going big.
Yep.
Yes, Lisa, you're answering it. Glad you're IT.
So, social implications for 1,000. This term has both European and indigenous origins, and it can be seen as a product of both of these worlds.
Hispanic.
That is incorrect. What? In the back.
They're good ones.
Not Latino.
Chicano with the X.
Not Chicano with the X. So yeah, so the reason it's Chicano with the CH, I can't say too much about it because again, once we get through all of these, then I'll break down each term a little bit more in depth, kind of where it comes from. But Chicano with the CH is the correct answer for that.
Can I just say something? Did you say this in your video that we watched yesterday? Does anyone remember that? That's right.
I made that.
He said it, and I should have worked with that.
Over here.
You should have politically charged.
Yes, for 1,000.
1,000?
Okay.
All right. So, politically charged. This term sparks debate around the question of Spanish language fluency, identity, and assimilation, especially within the Mexican community.
Chicano with an X.
Not with the next.
Oh,
It is Chicano with the CH.
She's in her own team. She's just like, bam.
What was it?
So, the answer for this question, this was Chicano with the CH as well, because Chicano with the CH is a term that's been used a lot of times, mostly by Mexicanos, to talk almost in a negative way about the Mexicans who are living on this side of the border, who may not be able to speak Spanish fluently, who may be a little bit more assimilated, who may show more American characteristics. All right, this table over here. For usage for 300. Your question. This term is used mostly by those who could be considered most assimilated. Hispanic is correct. Yep. Hispanic is the correct answer for this one. And in one of the other questions that we get to, you'll see why that's considered. All right, over here.
Origins for 500.
Origins for 500. Okay. This term's popularity is relatively recent, becoming an official census term in the year 2000. Not Hispanic.
No, because it's 2000.
Latina, Latino is the correct answer.
Yeah.
Hispanic was a census term that came a few years before, but Latino became official in 2000. Over here. Social for 700. Okay, your question. This term is often seen as a radical reclamation of an indigenous identity. Chicano with an X is the correct answer. All right, back here.
Over 500.
Which one?
Usage for 500.
500 was already done.
Usage.
Oh. All right. The use of this term lies primarily within activist circles who, again, have a strong focus on reclaiming an indigenous identity. Chicano with an X is correct. All right, bring over here, next table.
Yes. Origins for 300.
Origins for 300. This term began to gain traction as a way for Mexican-American youth to assert their individuality in about the 1940s, but it became far more popular during the 1960s and 70s. Which one? With the CH is correct. Yep. So the reason this term really started to gain popularity first in the 40s was because that's the first time that we see a large portion of the Mexican youth start to see themselves as different from their parents' generation. They started to understand themselves as beyond just Mexican or beyond just American. We see the Pachucos, the Zoot Suiters, start to develop during this time, and they were some of the biggest pushers of the term Chicano. Of course, in the 60s and 70s, that's when we see the Chicano movement really take place, and that's when a lot more people started to understand that term and identify with it.
Can you describe a zoot suit?
Yeah, so a Zoot suit, who's seen the mask? The mask, right? With the yellow suit that he's wearing? Imagine that, but even baggier. And so with the Mexican population, with the Chicanos, the Zoot suit usually wasn't that bright. It was oftentimes darker colors, blacks, grays, blues, browns. A lot of times it was pinstriped. It has the wingtip shoes, the real long chain that goes along the side, the baggy pants, the real wide brim fedora, the long jacket that goes down to about the knees, suspenders. And that again, the people who wore those, the pachucos, were some of the first people who really started to identify with the term Chicano.
Can you just tell me where the word comes from? I'm curious, especially since there's no Z in Spanish, like how they chose zoot, like, and who put
Oh
that
yes,
term?
so the zoot suits actually come from the African American community.
Oh.
It started in Harlem in the 20s, and it was kind of an African American fashion. Over the next 10, 20 years, it started to migrate to the West Coast, and it became a youth resistance kind of symbol. So a lot of Filipinos, poor whites, Mexican Americans, Chicanos, and African Americans were the ones who would wear them.
And there was a female version of it.
Yeah, and the pachucas, the female versions as well. And that was a really big issue because it was a challenge to masculinity. Because a lot of times they were wearing pants, which at the time was like this huge thing because women were expected only to wear skirts.
I have two questions if we're on the topic. Why didn't it fit? Why was it oversized and big? And second of all, I think I have an idea about that. Second of all, was the chain for a wallet like they are today?
Yeah, so that's what most of them were, like pocket watches or wallets or something. So the reason that they were real big and baggy is, again, that was just kind of like the flashy style that was really popular. In fact, in the 40s, there were the Zoot Suit riots that took place because Mexican American youth especially, but also other ethnic minorities were purchasing these suits, and there was a ration on fabric at the time because it was World War II. So the fact that they were making these extravagant suits using a lot of fabric, it created a lot of tension between the military and these marginalized communities, which again kind of culminates in the Zoot Suit riots.
The Great Wall of LA has a portion of it that's dedicated to the Zoot Suit riots. It's a mural, miles-long mural. We'll see it later today. I'll show it to you.
Can I share really quick? Jason. So Jason, on campus, I was his advisor since he started, and I get so inspired with where he's just been and all the knowledge he's come in with. When I first met him, I would see him walking across campus with his traditional Zoot suit on. And those were the days that I get so happy. You know, other students on campus would notice that too, so.
And he was driving his lowrider bright cherry. That's awesome.
Which is the color of your face right now.
Yeah, I do have a lowrider and a Zeus. Next table.
Is that us?
You guys are up.
Social implications, 500.
All right, social for 500. This term is usually seen as the best umbrella term for Spanish-speaking people, though it does also privilege a European identity. Hispanic is incorrect. Latino is the correct answer. Yep. Again, Latino is kind of the term that most people start to identify as the best umbrella term because it refers to Latin America rather than just like specific countries.
What do you mean by
Latino.
Eurocentric?
Yep. So Eurocentric, like focused on a European identity. So it's privileging a European identity over an indigenous one, over a native identity. And we'll talk about how that happens in one of the other questions. All right, we are back up here.
We're gonna go with politically charged. Of course, we're going to go for 700.
All right.
700.
Stick yourselves out.
This term is most commonly used by people with political consciousness, though in the past it has been used in a derogatory manner.
Chicano with the CH.
That is correct. Right, over here.
So glad I picked that one.
Yeah, go.
You pick 100?
Origins 100.
Origins for 100. This term was created in 1970, so it was created by the Richard Nixon administration as an umbrella for all Spanish-speaking people.
I don't know what the next is.
I'm going to go with Hispanic.
Hispanic is the correct answer. So, this term was the first kind of umbrella term that was used for Spanish-speaking peoples. And the reason that it's considered Eurocentric, it privileges a European identity, is because when we say Hispanic, we're referring to what country? Spain, España. Spain doesn't really have anything to do, I mean, the Spanish conquered the Americas. But by calling the people Hispanic, of Spanish origin, we are denying that native part, the people who were conquered. So that's one reason that this term is actually considered not as popular anymore. A lot of people don't go for the term Hispanic as much.
And is it in this time when researchers found that because it has the word "spig" in it?
I haven't heard that, but yeah, I mean that's possible because this was the time of the Chicano movement. So Hispanic is essentially this retaliation to a Chicano identity.
The Europeans also make like Hispaniola, but that a Euro.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different origins on that, so I'm not too sure. All right, next group. All right, politically charged for 100. People who are most politically conscious are least likely to identify with this term. Hispanic. And we just talked about why.
That would be easy.
They're only out of 400, man. They're only 400.
500.
Politically charged for 500. Okay. The relative obscurity of this term is due in part to its relatively recent use, but also because it represents a radical anti-colonial identity. That is correct.
We'd like to close out the category, Alex.
Politically charged for 300. This term hints back to a common European linguistic history. That is correct. Excellent. So, the reason that Latino, Latina is correct for this question is because if we look back within what we now call Latin America, this is related to another question, so I'm not going to go too much in depth, but the Portuguese were present, the Spanish were present, and a different group of people were also present, and all three of their languages go back to Latin. So when we say the word Latina, Latino, that again is privileging this European language. It's denying the fact that there's any indigenous elements, any native identities that exist there. So while Latino is now considered the most common, there are still some problems with that. All right, next group.
For like someone like else. That's a really good question. In general.
Which one? All right, usage for 1,000. All right. So the use of these terms. So this one actually has two responses. Okay. The use of these terms is often thought to have a generalizing effect on Spanish-speaking people in the U.S., and they are overall less preferred than a person's country of origin. So I'll read it one more time, right? So, the use of these terms is thought to have a generalizing effect on all the Spanish-speaking people within the United States. And both of these terms are usually less preferred than whatever country that person comes from.
That's preferred by you.
Right, yeah.
I'm sure you are.
Like preferred than Hispanic American, so if you're supposed
After really getting our heads together.
This is just too interesting.
With which? Hispanic is one of them. There's one more term.
These terms.
And Latino. So Hispanic and Latino are the two matters. All right, next group.
Let's do usage for 700.
Usage for 700. This term is primarily used by Mexican American and other Latino activists, though its use is not limited by race.
Is it one of the Chicanos?
It is one of them. Which one? CH. Yep. So, Chicano with the CH is considered a term that's not really limited by race. So people of all backgrounds could be considered Chicanos.
So if you're from Guatemala and you're living in America, you could be Chicano?
It depends how you identify yourself, but yes, you very well could. It's not just limited to Latinos. So a lot of times, like, we joke, and I was part of a group called Umas. We would joke and say we had members who were honorary Chicanos because they were part of the group. They spoke the language, they were part of the community, and they were a part of it. So it's not limited by race, it's more of a political idea.
So what would you be?
Huh?
So what would be a politically correct term if you were from Guatemala?
So,
And you
as of
identified as a Guatemalan American?
As of right now, Latino is considered the best general term, but most Guatemalans would be preferred to be called Guatemalan.
So even as an Anglo, if I'm in the Mexican American, if I'm an activist, I could be considered an honorary Chicano.
So
I'm wondering, or is that just applied to Guatemalan?
No. Yeah, that's a good question.
Like,
So it really depends on the circles that you're in, because you're never really going to get two people who are going to tell you it means the exact same thing to be Chicano. That's not going to happen. And so it is one of those very fine lines where it can go that way, but it's not so much a matter of like me saying, oh, I'm this, and so that makes me it, as much as if you're from a different community, being accepted within that and brought in rather than kind of pushing a person's way in.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is it more because it comes from that this was a term created by the people?
Yeah.
Or themselves, to identify themselves, as opposed to government categorizing them as whatever?
Exactly. Any other questions about that? All right. Which group
It's
are
our
we?
turn.
All right. Origins for 1,000. All right. So this term's use in the Americas dates back to Napoleon's attempted conquest of Mexico in the early 1860s.
Rachel thinks. Rachel thinks it's Latino.
That is the correct answer.
Oh, yeah, I meant.
Oh, right.
Latino. And so, if we look at this, in the early 1860s, France was focused on expanding their empire. If we're looking at world history, France was trying to expand their empire. And so part of that was taking over part of the Americas, creating French America, reclaiming some of the territory that they had lost through the Louisiana Purchase and different wars that had taken place throughout history. So they were trying to reestablish their empire in the Americas. To do that, they began in Mexico. They invade off of the coast of Veracruz on the 5th of May in the early 1850s, which results in Cinco de Mayo. Eventually, they do make their way to the capital and establish an empire there. So what the French realized, though, is that they can't reframe the entire history of the Americas and call it French America, because there's such a strong history of the Spanish language specifically being spoken there. So rather than calling it French America, because before it was Spanish America, they combine it, link back to that common European linguistic history, call it Latin America. And so that's where that term comes from. All right, we're back up here.
You gotta close it out?
Yeah, close it out.
We'd like origins for 700, please.
All right, origins for 700.
I have a question.
This term is derived from the name of the people commonly referred to as the Aztecs.
Chicano with an X?
That is-
Wait, what is Chicano?
Before we go on though, who knows what the proper name of this group of people is? We call them the Aztecs, but they understood themselves in a very different way. The Mexica, right? And specifically, the group who lived on the island in the middle of Lake Texcoco were the Mexica Tenochca. They founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, which becomes Mexico City. So the Mexica is Mexico. Tenochtitlan, the Tenochca is Tenochtitlan, which becomes Mexico City. All right, next group.
I want to take your class.
Social implications for 300. So the use of this term privileges a Spanish identity and denies an indigenous.
Wait, I know he talks, yeah,
Hispanic, right? Because again, Spain, Spanish, that's denying the indigenous element, focusing only on the European.
Some Hispanics love to be called only Hispanic.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Some people like love that term, and that's how they call themselves.
Again, it's
Social. Okay. So the use of this term tends to denote a political Mexican identity. Chicano with the CH. All right. So our last question. So for this one, I'll just give it to whoever's hand was up first. All right. After I read it, though. So this term is most commonly used identifier today for people of Latin American origin. Latino is correct. So we have one final question. All right. So for our final question, what we're going to do is I want everybody in their groups to talk about this question. Afterwards, we're going to go one by one and have every group give their response, and then we'll talk about those responses after. Okay?
Play the music? Yeah. Just sing it. Just
So,
sing it.
our final question. What is a Chicano?
Okay.
Or Chicano? All right, take 1 minute in your groups.
back in the 40s, and was.
Kind of like something, political and social aspects.
All right, let's go ahead and bring it up. All right, let's go ahead and bring it up in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so as we said before, we're going to go ahead and rotate all the way around. Every group will go ahead and give their definition of what it is to be a Chicana or Chicano. We'll go ahead and start over here, and we'll go ahead and again rotate to the left.
With us?
Yep, we'll start with this group, and then we'll rotate around, kind of create a spiral.
We said it's a fluid identity, given term. A little louder.
All right, so if whoever's speaking could just go ahead and stand up so everyone can hear it.
So we said it's a self-given term to identify yourself based on political identity and your self-identity.
Next group? Yep.
Okay. We said Chicano is a person with political sensibility who sees themselves as more multinational, bicultural. Yes.
All right, thank you. Next group?
So we said kind of along those lines, someone who doesn't necessarily identify as Mexican or American, but need cultural fusion.
All right. Excellent, thank you. Next group?
So we said not really a new generation, but people who were like more American, kind of, who were born here, but their parents are more into Mexican heritage.
All right, excellent, thank you. Next group?
A person that has pride in the origins of the Mexicano, the origins of their fathers, but yet they have a different experience, different generation, different way of identifying, and want to establish political presence. And so then I'm not Mexican, I'm not American, I am Chicano.
Excellent. Next group?
According to Jason, Chicana or Chicana is the second or third generation of immigrants being in the States who don't identify of neither identity but both.
All right, excellent, thank you. Next group?
Oh my gosh, guys. No. Whatever.
Oh, don't go.
Wait, guys, come on. Both of you, grab hands and go. Thank you.
We kind of agree with everyone that, mostly with this table, that it's like the, I cannot remember your video that you said Chicano, it's like living behind the indigenous background but not adopting the American side, like your self-identity, kind of your new creator. That's kind of what it is.
Say the hyphen.
The hyphen. Oh, someone in one of the workshops, someone mentioned the teacher or professor was Mexican American, but she felt like the hyphen, she wasn't Mexican, but she was an American American. That's kind of, she was in the middle. She was in the middle. Someone says that, I don't know.
Excellent, thank you for that. And our final group.
Everyone has said it. But we were focusing on the self-identification of the generation that realized that they weren't like their parents, but they were also American, and so it's a mix, and it's a pride in that mix.
I have a question. So the mix, the fusion of the European and the indigenous culture, where does the mestizo come into play?
So, Chicano, at least like from my perspective. So, well first, let me just say everybody's correct for their definitions of Chicana and Chicano. There's not really anybody who can really tell you, nail it down, this is exactly what it means to be Chicana and Chicano. It's this fluid identity, it's always developing, it's about establishing a political presence. It's all of these things mixed into one. So you ask two different Chicanas, you're not going to get the exact same answer as to what it means to be Chicana or Chicano. But in response to your question, at least kind of from my perspective, I see Chicano as the political identity of the racial mestizaje. So mestizo is mixed Spanish and indigenous, but that's the racial identity. So for me, Chicano is the political identity that goes along with that.
I have a native English ignorant question, but like, is the origin, like looking at the origin of the word, like I think of like the second generation, third generations of children, chicas? Is that like chica, chico?
So
would that be
the origins of the
children?
term go back to Mexica, right? The people of Mexico were, when the Spanish first came, they called them Mexicanos, Mexicanos. Over time, that got corrupted, and it was Chicanos with an X. So it was Xicano, and that was the indigenous people were called that.
So that was way.
Yeah, this was in like colonial.
Oh, all right.
So when
that seemed like a modern term. Okay, so
Yeah.
the X is an old term.
The X is ancient.
Oh,
It's ancient.
I
And that's why it's that radical indigenous reclamation, because we're going back to that
Well, all
point.
right.
It was when the United States took over the Southwest that we see the CH become more popular, just because of like pronunciation, the corruption of lit letters, and it becomes Chicano.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Can I ask, the idea with like Aslan and the term like can I have you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so within like the Chicano movement, within a lot of activist circles, there's this concept called Aztlán. Aztlán is the mythic homeland of the Mexica people. When the Mexica lived in Aztlán, they were called the Aztec, the Azteca. Azteca means person from Aztlán. Aztlán was located somewhere here in the southwest United States, likely either Utah, New Mexico, or Arizona, somewhere within that area. So the indigenous people of Mexico are actually originally from the southwest United States. The southwest was Aztlán. They were called Azteca when they lived here. And then according to their traditions, they were led by a god called Huitzilopochtli, the left-handed hummingbird, who represents this idea of the will to act, the will to move. And so this is the god who led them south until they found a location where a cactus would be sitting with an eagle perched atop it devouring a serpent. Upon this location, they would build their capital city. So the Mexica Tenochca traveled south until they found this location, which was on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, which eventually becomes Mexico City, the biggest city in the world at the time of European colonization.
Think about the flag.
Can you state the 7 states that are said to be ethnic?
Yeah, so the 7 states, so within so this is indigenous history, is where that concept comes from. During the Chicano movement, Mexican Americans in the Southwest started to go back to that concept of Aztlán, to say, you know, we're not foreigners, we're not people who are immigrating here from a different place, we're simply returning home. Ancestrally, this is where we're from. We're not immigrants, we're coming home. And so those 7 states were the 7 states that were taken in the Mexican-American War. States of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Utah, Nevada, and Colorado. Those 7 states were at one time part of Mexico. That's why all of their names are in Spanish. Utah is derived from Ute, which is one of the native groups there. But all of the other states are Spanish words because they were part of Mexico. And so that's kind of what that concept, what that term comes from.
Can we put in a plug, because we're going to do an afternoon session on Chicano. Chicano is going to be like Chicano Studies 101. You all will come to it.
How do you spell? I feel like I'm doing Aslan from.
Aztlán is.
I was trying to spell it.
Yeah. It's Aztlan. And it's very interesting because if you're like Googling Aztlán, if you're looking that up on the internet, you're going to come up with a lot of far right-wing sources that talk about it as the Reconquista, people coming over trying to like militarily take over the Southwest for Mexico. That's not what it's about. It's about returning home. It's about, again, going back to these indigenous concepts. When they're taken out of context, they can appear very scary to a lot of people who are threatened by that. Because you do see a huge number, especially of the Mexicanos, when they come to the U.S., settle in the Southwest, the land that used to be Mexico. So, like, when you take those together, but you don't really understand, like, that history or those, I guess, larger ideological implications, publications, it appears to be this invasion that the far right wing has kind of called it.
So I need to stop us here. I got to put my teacher hat on for a moment. You know, a lot of people use Jeopardy games as kind of like a quiz to find out what people know. Jason turns the table and uses the Jeopardy game to teach us things. Totally. You're a remarkable teaching moment, Jason. Let's give him a round of applause. You see why his students are so lucky. So we got about a 10-minute break, and then we got our